U.S. lawmakers are asking NBC to do its part when broadcasting the Beijing Olympics and avoid spreading Chinese propaganda. The station has also been urged to include the communist regime's human rights abuses. The president of Purdue University is asking those who suppress freedom on campus to continue their education elsewhere. That's after a student was allegedly harassed by Chinese students after he spoke out about Chinese politics. Chinese authorities revoke a famous human rights lawyer's license. He has a history of representing cases that have touched Beijing's nerves. The U.S. is slapping sanctions on more than 40 Chinese companies. Among them is the world's largest drone maker and supplier to several law enforcement agencies. And Taiwan is holding its fourth ever referendum. But as citizens prepare to visit the polls, a report suggests Beijing may be getting its hands dirty. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Two U.S. Democratic lawmakers are calling on TV station NBC to use its coverage of the Beijing Olympics to raise awareness on human rights. The U.S. broadcaster paid historic sums for the rights to air the games, but politicians and experts have argued that the coverage may risk purveying Chinese propaganda. Senator Jeff Merkley and Congressman James McGovern wrote a letter to NBC Universal CEO Jeff Shell on Thursday. They are asking the network to provide background coverage on the Chinese regime's human rights abuses in Xinjiang and its suppression of democracy in Hong Kong. They also asked the station to avoid broadcasting Chinese state-sponsored footage of happy minorities. Beijing usually uses such footage to cover up for their crimes in the region. The two lawmakers are respectively the chair and co-chair of the Congressional Executive Commission on China. It's a bipartisan committee that monitors human rights in the country. NBC also aired the 2008 Beijing Olympics. China director at Human Rights Watch, Sophie Richardson, pointed out the potential moral dilemma. She told Variety that the broadcasting has huge public relations value for the Chinese regime. That's because it gets to present to the world exactly the image it wanted at that time. And not all of that was within NBC's control. She said it's important for foreign sponsors and broadcasters of the games to realize their role in promoting the Chinese regime's narrative. The president of Purdue University is asking those who suppress freedom on campus to continue their education elsewhere. That's responding to a case where a Chinese student was allegedly harassed and threatened by other students from China for speaking out on Chinese politics. In November, news outlet ProPublica reported that Purdue student Zhi Haokong made a post memorizing the pro-democracy students that were killed in the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. After his Chinese schoolmates found out about the post, they followed Kong around campus, accused him of being a CIA agent, and threatened to report him to the Chinese embassy. Then officers from China's spy agency visited Kong's parents in China, telling them to warn their son about speaking out. Purdue University President Mitch Daniels wrote in an email to students and faculties that he wasn't aware of the harassment until it made it into national news. He said freedom of expression is central to the university's values, and he condemned any students trying to limit that freedom. He wrote that those seeking to deny those rights to others, let alone to collude with foreign governments in repressing, will need to pursue their education elsewhere. Chinese authorities have revoked the law license of a famous human rights lawyer. His name is Liang Xiaojun. For the past decade, Liang has represented many rights cases that hit the Chinese regime's nerves. His clients include Falun Gong practitioners, Hong Kong residents, and Chinese pro-democracy activists. Having the license revoked means Liang wouldn't be able to practice law in China anymore. In a statement, Beijing authorities detailed why they revoked Liang's license. They say the main reason is that Liang openly supports Falun Gong on Chinese social media. Falun Gong is a spiritual meditation practice based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. It became popular in the 90s, with tens of millions of people practicing it. But the Chinese regime launched a nationwide persecution campaign against it in 1999. Since then, millions have been detained and tortured. At least 4,000 practitioners have been tortured to death. Liang has represented hundreds of Falun Gong practitioners in the past decade. One of his clients is an award-winning artist called Xu Na, who's also a Falun Gong practitioner. She was arrested last year for reporting on Beijing's pandemic restrictions. She is currently in a detention center in Beijing. And the U.S. State Department has been urging the Chinese regime to release her. This isn't the first time that authorities went after her. Back in 2008, police detained she and her husband before the Beijing Olympics. Her husband was a popular musician and also practiced Falun Gong. He died in police custody 11 days after being arrested. She hasn't been allowed to see her husband's body up to this day. The cause of his death remains unclear. As for Liang himself, losing the license means his 2 decades of career in law has come to an end. Posting on Twitter, he says he is grateful for all the human rights defenders and religious believers that he had represented, and he says he has no regrets about his journey. A Chinese dissident poet could face jail time for writing poems and creating arts to support Hong Kong's democracy movements. He and his wife stood trial in China on Thursday. Here are the details.
On Thursday, a court in Yunnan province opened a secret court session against Chinese dissident poet Wang Zong and his wife. The court hearing was closed to the public due to what was deemed the involvement of state secrets. Wang was arrested in May last year. His crime? Some of his poetry voices support for Hong Kong's democracy movement. His wife, Wang Li, was detained 2 weeks after his arrest. She was charged with appealing for her husband's release. Both were also charged with inciting subversion of state power. Wang recited one of his poems as his final statement in court on Thursday. The couple's defense lawyer entered a not guilty plea on their behalf. The court did not announce their sentences after the trial. Their lawyer is the second to take on the case. That's after their former defense lawyer, Lu Sui, said his license to practice law had been suspended.
The court was open yesterday, but the hearing was not open. His crime is all about his opinion. He wrote some poems and created some pieces of performance art about Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement. They're all trivial things. Nothing is major.
Lu revealed that he met with Wang Zong in October inside a detention center last year. Wang was fine at that time, but his wife, who had suffered from depression, was in a poor state of mental health.
Wang Li, she had been in poor health. When the lawyer went to meet with her and asked about her young son's name, she couldn't remember it for a long time. The threats she had faced made her mental health worse than before.
Wang and his wife have 4 children together. The poet's mother began taking care of them after both parents were detained. Local authorities have cut off any contact Wang and his wife had with the outside world. The couple's bank accounts were also frozen.
The grandma is taking care of the children, and the 2 older ones attend school, and the 2 younger ones did not go to school last year. I don't know what's going on this year, but life must be very difficult because both of them are detained. No one makes money.
A friend of the couple revealed that the Wang children are being monitored.
A volunteer once went to visit their home. Their children were monitored because a few minutes after the visit, people in plain clothes knocked on the door.
In 2014, Wang Zong was detained for 9 months for holding a poetry reading in support of the Hong Kong democracy movement. His family members were also forced to relocate several times.
To comply with Beijing's requirements, Microsoft's search engine Bing is suspending its auto-suggestion function in China. On Friday, Bing posted on its Chinese website, saying that Chinese laws require it to suspend the search auto-suggestion feature in mainland China for 30 days, though the notice did not say what those laws are and how they affected Bing's autofill feature. Microsoft's Bing is the last major foreign search engine still operating in China. The service interruption is Microsoft's latest worry as Beijing clamps down on the internet sector. Earlier this year, internet users noticed that Bing had removed the iconic Tank Man image from search results. It happened around the anniversary of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. And in October, Microsoft said it would shut down social functions on the Chinese version of its LinkedIn. They said it was because of a significantly more challenging operating environment and greater compliance requirements in the country. According to analytics firm StatCounter, Bing is the 3rd most popular search engine in China. Brain control technology. It may sound like science fiction, but the U.S. is accusing China of developing it for military use. NTD's Iris Tao has more.
The U.S. is blacklisting dozens of Chinese research institutes over human rights violations. The Commerce Department on Thursday said is adding to its export blacklist China's Academy of Military Medical Sciences and its 11 research institutes. It alleges they're using biotechnology to support Chinese military end uses and end users, to include purported brain control weaponry. While the agency did not elaborate on the described brain control weapons, a senior U.S. official told the Financial Times that Beijing is trying to use emerging biotechnologies to modernize its army. This includes research on gene editing, human performance enhancement, and brain-machine interfaces. Announcing the latest sanctions, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo says while biotechnology can save lives, unfortunately, the PRC is choosing to use these technologies to pursue control over its people and its repression of members of ethnic and religious minority groups. The Thursday move will bar American companies from selling components to these entities without a license. And this is only a part of a larger wave of sanctions coming at Beijing.
I think it would be shocking to all of us to know that even as I stand here now, there are products in this very chamber in the Senate that were touched by and made by the hands of slaves. It is a horrifying, horrifying human rights situation.
That was Senator Marco Rubio speaking Wednesday. The U.S. Senate is giving final approval to a bill that bans all imports from China's Xinjiang region, unless businesses can prove they were produced without forced labor. And the Treasury announced today that it is adding commercial drone maker DJI to its blacklist. This for helping the communist regime surveil Uyghurs and others in China. DJI is the world's largest commercial drone maker. Iris Tao, NTD News.
U.S. officials have been sounding the alarm about this company in recent years. They say DJI drones could take American data into the hands of the Chinese regime. Congress has banned the Pentagon from using DJI drones. But up until 2017, this Chinese company was a major supplier to the U.S. military. Right now, law enforcement agencies across the U.S. are still using DJI drones. That includes America's largest police force, the New York City Police Department. The U.S. Secret Service and the FBI recently bought DJI drones as well. DJI controls more than half of America's drone market, and it's more affordable compared to other drones. But under Chinese law, DJI is compelled to hand over all of its data to Beijing if officials ask for it. Taiwanese citizens' support for the island's ruling party will be put to the test this Saturday. Taiwanese will head to the polls this weekend to vote on 4 referendums. And both parties, the ruling and the opposition, have taken clear sides on each measure. NTD's Don Ma has more.
Taiwan will hold the 4th national referendum in its history this weekend. Citizens will vote on 4 different issues. One of them, whether Taiwan should continue to import pork containing ractopamine from the U.S. Ractopamine is an animal feed additive used to promote leanness in farmed animals. The current ruling party in Taiwan approved the pork imports last year to show that Taiwan is a reliable trade partner to the U.S. But the island's opposition party suggests a ban on the pork, citing health concerns. The referendum will prove a key test, and results will highlight where Taiwanese citizens' support falls. But it looks like Beijing is getting involved too. According to the Taipei-based Information Operations Research Group, known as IORG, the Chinese Communist Party is meddling in the referendum. IORG is a research group focused on mainland China's information manipulation and influence operations in Taiwan. And per a report released earlier this month, there are signs that Beijing is using the referendum to promote anti-U.S. sentiments in Taiwan. The report says that since April, Chinese state-run media outlets have been spreading the narrative that the U.S. have been reaping unequal benefits from Taiwan through pork and arms sales, and that despite those benefits, Taiwan still couldn't source vaccines from the U.S. The report refuted the narrative, pointing out that the U.S. announced in June it would give Taiwan 750,000 vaccine doses. The IORG says the issue of pork imports is directly related to U.S.-Taiwan relations. That's why Beijing may be trying to influence public opinion on the island. Don Ma, NTD News.
Hong Kong voters are gearing up to go to the polls for the first time this weekend under new election laws. It comes after most opposition parties are out of the election race following reform influenced by Beijing. Critics are saying the election is just for show. NTD's L. Rhodes has more.
Hong Kong is holding its first election under a new system on Sunday. But a significant proportion of people say they will not go out to vote.
The government has been trying very hard to boost the turnout, but judging from a series of opinion surveys that we have done so far, it hasn't been a very big success.
Hong Kong brought in new laws in May to cut the number of directly elected lawmakers down from 35 to 20. Meanwhile, the legislature was expanded from 70 to 90 seats. And those candidates are vetted to ensure they are loyal to Beijing in what's called a patriots-only system. It means most of the lawmakers in the legislature would be pro-Beijing. Sunday's vote will choose nearly half the legislature.
This is a new system. The new electoral system is a double-seat, single-vote system. And there are some changes in the way of voting.
The electoral reforms and vetting process have led to fewer pro-democracy candidates. Directly elected lawmakers can only grab 20 out of the 90 seats.
Now we don't have the power to oppose, but we could still monitor the government and officials as well as the budget. A legislator also has an important role to communicate with foreign media. If no one is doing it, we are just sitting back and doing nothing. I choose not to sit back and surrender.
Most of the well-known pro-democracy activists and opposition politicians are currently either in jail or awaiting trial. Others have fled to another country. They've been accused of violating the region's national security law. This year, the Elections Committee approved the nominations of just 153 candidates, about half of those nominated to run in the 2016 race. In March next year, Hong Kong will pick its next leader under the same system, which ensures they are approved by Beijing. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
The UK and Australia sign a free trade deal. It's set to eliminate almost all tariffs on trade between the two countries. The Australian government is urging exporters to reduce their reliance on China after Beijing weaponized trade to coerce Australia for political reasons. NTD's Eddie Atkin brings us more.
Britain and Australia on Thursday signed a free trade deal projected to boost trade by over £10 billion while ending tariffs on all UK exports. The deal was signed virtually by the UK International Trade Secretary in London and the Australian Trade Minister in Adelaide.
It is a truly historic deal, the first negotiated by the United Kingdom from scratch as a sovereign trading nation.
British businesses will be encouraged to invest in Australia, and it will be easier for young Australians to come and work in the UK. It is expected to boost Britain's economy by over £2 billion per year.
Our two nations know that trade means jobs and growth. That's why we have secured tariff-free trade, helping our exporters sell more of the best of British, from Scotch whisky to electric cars made in the north of England.
Tariffs will be eliminated on 99% of Australian goods exported to Britain. Reducing tariffs on wine and beef will help Australian exporters hit by sanctions in China to pivot to British sales. China is Australia's largest trading partner, but Beijing began imposing sanctions on Australian products last year. This prompted the Morrison government to urge exporters to reduce their reliance on China. The final terms of the deal will be put before Parliament for scrutiny. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
U.S. ratings agencies are downgrading Chinese property giants, including Evergrande. We hear from a China affairs analyst on what he thinks is next. NTD's Michael Corder has the details.
The S&P downgraded China's Evergrande to selective default on Friday because the company, which has more than $300 billion in liabilities, missed the debt payment deadline last week. Fitch has already downgraded the developer to restricted default. Another Chinese developer, Shimao, has also been downgraded by both Moody's and Fitch. Market watchers warn that the downgrades could trigger some creditors to demand immediate repayment, further pressuring these developers' liquidity. So what's Beijing's attitude? China affairs analyst Yiping Zhang thinks Beijing might not bail Evergrande out.
If the Evergrande has a huge ripple effect on the Chinese real estate and GDP, then Beijing will step in and help bail out. But at this moment, it seems unlikely because unless it jeopardizes political stability, Beijing is not going to do anything about it.
Evergrande bondholders, including Marathon Asset Management, said they'll prioritize paying migrant workers and suppliers first, while offshore creditors would be near the bottom. However, Zhang thinks the opposite will happen.
And China does not want to jeopardize their reputation to have a poor investment environment. For now, FDI, foreign direct investment, is still a major factor for China's stability, financially, economically. Without FDI, China is going to be in a much worse situation.
Chinese developers are in trouble due to the regime's crackdown on borrowing. It has caused many defaults and credit rating downgrades among developers. But some people are still not losing faith. The Wall Street Journal cited investors who are optimistic about Asian junk bonds in 2022. Michael Quarter, NTD News.
A German warship entered the South China Sea on Wednesday for the first time in almost 20 years. The vessel will pass through the sea on its way to Singapore. The move signals a shift in Germany's strategy toward the region under its new chancellor. It marks Berlin joining other Western nations to counter China's territorial ambitions in that region. China has claimed 90% of the South China Sea as its own territory, but an international tribunal has ruled against Beijing's claims. U.S. Navy vessels regularly sail through this region against China's territorial claims. U.S. allies, including the UK, France, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, also sail in this region regularly. Officials in Berlin said the move shows that Germany does not accept China's territorial claims. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow.